Welcome to this sanctuary of deep rest, where ancient wisdom guides you toward profound tranquility and restorative sleep. If you feel inclined, let us know in the comments below what country and time zone you are listening from, grounding this shared moment of peace across the vastness of the world. Tonight, we explore a Zen Buddhist teaching. True peace comes not from escaping daily life, but by fully inhabiting it with presence, transforming ordinary tasks like washing a bowl or sweeping a path into extraordinary moments of mindfulness. If these teachings bring you peace, subscribe to the channel to support this sanctuary and ensure these calming resources remain available for all who seek them. Now, gently turn your awareness to your body, feeling gravity anchor you deeply, and take 3 slow, intentional breaths, each exhale releasing tension and leading you further into this comforting sense of letting go. Kenji and the search for distant illumination. In the quiet embrace of the temple known as Morning Cloud, surrounded by ancient cedars and mist-shrouded hills, lived a young monk named Kenji, whose heart yearned fiercely for enlightenment, believing it resided only in grand, arduous pursuits, far removed from the dust and labor of daily existence. Kenji spent his days striving, pushing his mind during long, intense hours of formal meditation, zazen, convinced that the ultimate truth was a treasure hidden atop the highest spiritual mountain, accessible only through dramatic sacrifice and total disconnection from the world he inhabited every moment. He often looked upon the simple, repetitive tasks of the temple, the gardening, the cleaning, the food preparation, as tiresome distractions, mere obligations to be completed quickly, so he could return to what he deemed the real practice of silent sitting. His mind was constantly racing ahead of his body, viewing the present moment only as a tiresome bridge to a more spiritually fulfilling future, perhaps imagining himself on a solitary mountain retreat, or deeply immersed in a profound koan that would suddenly shatter his previous understanding, leading to a glorious revelatory insight. This impatience manifested in subtle ways: a hurried step across the smooth wooden floors, a sigh of exasperation when asked to fetch water, or a tendency to focus on the time remaining in a task rather than the texture and completeness of the task itself. He was searching so intensely for the grand illumination that he perpetually overlooked the small, steady glow that emanated from the very spot where his 2 feet were planted. The older monks, particularly the head gardener, noticed Kenji's perpetual state of internal rushing, the way his shoulders remained slightly tensed even when standing still, and the subtle underlying dissatisfaction that colored his perception of his duties. They understood that Kenji was trapped in the spiritual ego, the belief that certain activities hold more merit than others, a common misconception among zealous beginners who fail to grasp the non-dualistic nature of Zen practice. They knew that true insight doesn't suddenly descend from the heavens, but organically unfolds from the persistent dedication to the moment-to-moment reality, however mundane it may appear on the surface of things. Kenji revered the historical accounts of great Zen masters who achieved Satori through sudden, shocking realizations, perhaps after hearing a single unexpected sound or reading an impactful line of scripture, hoping his own journey would be equally dramatic and swift. He devoured complex texts, analyzing philosophical concepts late into the night, seeking intellectual understanding as a substitute for direct, felt experience, mistakenly believing that the map was the territory and that reading about enlightenment was the same as living an enlightened life. This scholarly pursuit further distanced him from the grounded reality of the temple, convincing him that wisdom was abstract rather than something intimately tied to the heat of the fire or the smoothness of polished wood. The temple environment, in its relentless simplicity, was the perfect crucible for Kenji's growing impatience, designed specifically to reveal the difference between intellectual seeking and true embodied presence. Every piece of worn stone and every perfectly raked garden bed spoke not of grand philosophies, but of decades of quiet, focused labor, each object holding the silent wisdom that comes from repeated, careful attention. Something Kenji was determined to bypass in his quest for spiritual acceleration. The air itself seemed to hum with a slow, deliberate rhythm, a rhythm that Kenji's inner clock consistently fought against, longing for a speed that the natural world refused to offer. This deep yearning for a transcendent experience led Kenji to overlook the profound teaching inherent in the immediate surroundings, missing the subtle beauty of the way the morning light touched the shoji screens, or the quiet, steady rhythm of the master's breath during walking meditation, kinhin. He viewed the physical space merely as a backdrop for his real work, failing to see the interconnectedness between the care given to the temple and the care required to maintain a clear and peaceful mind. The physical world was, for him, a distraction rather than the mirror reflecting the state of his own internal landscape. Kenji often lamented to an older monk, Brother Shin, that he felt spiritually stalled, believing his rigorous meditation efforts were yielding frustratingly little fruit, expressing the deep-seated anxiety that he was wasting precious time scrubbing floors instead of confronting the deepest mysteries of the Dharma. Brother Shin simply smiled, his face wrinkled like ancient parchment, and quoted the classic Zen saying, which resonated with the gentle irony Kenji had yet to understand. If you want to know the meaning of the water, look at the moon reflected in the bucket. The young monk took this quote intellectually, pondering its abstract meaning about reflection and illusion, yet he failed to recognize its concrete application. The bucket itself was the reality of his everyday tasks, the simple tool that made the reflection possible in the first place, symbolizing that the grand truth is always dependent upon the humble, present moment. He missed the point that the moon, the object of his spiritual quest, only becomes visible when the water, the mind, is still, settled, and contained within the vessel of daily activity. His dedication to seeking illumination somewhere else created a constant internal noise, a subtle tension that prevented the very stillness he sought to achieve during his seated practice, demonstrating the futility of separating formal practice from everyday life. He failed to see that the practice of sitting was merely a training ground for the practice of standing, walking, eating and scrubbing, all of which demanded an even greater integration of mindful awareness because they involved movement and interaction with the material world. Kenji's journey, which we now accompany, is the universal journey of learning that the divine is not something separate or hidden, but is rather interwoven into the fabric of the most mundane existence, awaiting discovery in the careful placement of an object, the feel of a tool, or the simple sensation of breathing while completing a task. Let us drift with him now toward his first explicit lesson on this path, as he is about to confront the task he finds most distasteful, the chore that will serve as his very first, unexpected mirror into the state of his impatient mind, the frustration of the dishes. One cool, crisp morning, immediately following the communal breakfast where the monks silently consumed their rice and miso, Kenji was assigned the unenviable task of washing all the dishes used by the entire community, a task that spanned dozens of bowls, steaming cups, and heavy, iron cooking vessels that still smelled strongly of the morning's earthy broth. Kenji inwardly groaned, feeling a familiar wave of resentment rise within him viewing this obligation as a tremendous waste of precious spiritual time. Time he felt should be devoted to profound contemplation or rigorous study of ancient sutras, not the scrubbing of hardened rice residue from the ceramic surfaces. He approached the task with an attitude of forced haste, determined to finish as quickly as possible, splashing water carelessly and stacking the bowls precariously, rushing through the motions purely for the sake of completion rather than quality. His hands moved swiftly, treating the dishes not as sacred objects, but as obstacles to be overcome, ignoring the warmth of the water that could have been soothing, the gentle fragrance of the natural soap, and the satisfying texture of the cleaning cloth against the slick, wet porcelain. Sensations that could have easily anchored him firmly in the present moment. Instead, his mind was far away, planning his afternoon zazen session, composing complex mental arguments about the nature of impermanence, or worrying about the state of his personal progress, creating a dense internal fog that completely obscured the immediate reality of the steam rising from the basin. This separation of mind and body meant that the physical labor became pure drudgery, stripped of any potential for mindful engagement or quiet satisfaction, leaving him only with frustration. Kenji plunged his hands into the deep wooden basin, the water temperature scalding, yet he barely registered the heat, his focus entirely on minimizing the duration of the chore, scrubbing vigorously and without precision, often missing spots or leaving subtle, greasy films on the sides of the bowls. He saw the piles of dirty dishes awaiting him, not as individual opportunities for practice, but as an overwhelming mountain of obstruction that stood between him and his perceived spiritual duty, allowing the feeling of resentment to flavor his every action, subtly tightening the muscles in his jaw and shoulders. He didn't notice the precise sound the water made as it drained, or the way the sunlight refracted through the bubbles, because he was too busy projecting his future freedom from this tiresome requirement. The deeper Zen teaching embedded in this simple task is the understanding that the mind creates its own prison when it judges an activity as inferior or undeserving of full attention, revealing the fundamental Buddhist insight that suffering often arises not from the conditions themselves, but from the internal resistance to those conditions. By resisting the dishes, Kenji was actively resisting the present moment, creating a painful division between what he was doing and what he wished he were doing, proving that the true spiritual training lies in accepting the reality offered by the universe at any given second, even if that reality involves scrubbing dried oatmeal. This inability to embrace the mundane reflected a deep-seated desire to control the spiritual path, rather than surrender to the process as it naturally unfolded. As Kenji hastily scrubbed a large serving platter, his impatience caused him to drop a wet cup, which clattered loudly against the side of the basin, luckily not breaking, but the abrupt noise momentarily snapped him out of his mental preoccupation, leaving him momentarily annoyed and slightly embarrassed by the disruption. He quickly retrieved the cup, his breathing shallow and rapid, instantly rushing back into the task with renewed, frantic energy, refusing to pause even for a single intentional breath to recenter himself or acknowledge the small shock of the noise. This episode highlighted the lack of conscious control over his actions, illustrating how a distracted mind inevitably leads to clumsiness and mistakes, turning a simple task into a source of accident and stress. He observed with a detached disdain how the food particles swirled in the soapy water, creating a murky, unappetizing blend, and he hurried to change the water multiple times, not out of care for hygiene, but simply to push the task along faster, failing to recognize that the effort of changing the water itself was part of the practice. The texture of the grease, the stubbornness of the burnt residue at the bottom of the pots, all seemed to conspire against his rapid completion, and he mentally catalogued these minor impediments as proof that the universe was actively hindering his spiritual development, demonstrating a classic case of projection where internal friction is externalized onto the environment. The act of washing dishes, when approached mindfully, can be a potent form of meditation, a practice known in Zen circles for its simplicity and immediate sensory feedback, where the sensations of temperature, smell, and touch serve as immediate anchors for the roaming mind. If Kenji had chosen presence, he would have felt the deep satisfaction of transformation, turning the dirty into the clean, a physical metaphor for refining the rough, untamed aspects of the mind. Instead, the task remained a barrier, a chore devoid of meaning, because he denied it the light of his full, compassionate attention, treating the process merely as a prerequisite for something else deemed more worthy. As he finished scrubbing the last bowl, his movements jerky and hurried, he failed to rinse away all the soapy residue, stacking the damp dishes haphazardly on the drying rack, already mentally composing his escape plan back to the cushion, convinced that he had successfully navigated this tiresome delay. His hands, though wet and pruned, felt no connection to the labor, and his mind, though temporarily relieved, felt no genuine rest, having been constantly agitated by the internal fight against the moment, missing the inherent peace found in completed, dedicated work. He wiped his hands on a nearby cloth with a sigh, a sound heavy with self-pity and the belief that he had endured an unnecessary hardship, convinced that his spiritual account was now sufficiently credited to allow him permission to engage in higher forms of practice. The dishes stood stacked, visually clean but spiritually empty, lacking the vital energy of mindful effort, silently reflecting the state of Kenji's fragmented attention, a collection of objects that were physically complete but symbolically unfinished in terms of genuine spiritual engagement. Unbeknownst to Kenji, the Master Hiko had been quietly observing the process from the doorway, noting the speed, the tension in the young monk's shoulders, and the lack of care in the rinsing, seeing immediately that the performance was driven by evasion rather than embrace. The Master saw the perfect opportunity to gently redirect Kenji's fervent seeking from an abstract future goal toward the tangible reality of the present task, understanding that a powerful teaching moment often emerges when a student is most deeply entangled in their own resistance and intellectual confusion. Master Hiko and the empty bowl. Master Hiko, a man whose presence was as silent and solid as the ancient stones of the temple foundation, quietly approached Kenji as the young monk attempted his hasty exit, holding in his hands a single, perfectly smooth, empty ceramic rice bowl, which Hiko presented to Kenji without a word of greeting or judgment. Kenji, startled by the master's sudden appearance, immediately felt a familiar rush of nervousness and expectation, wondering if this was the moment he would finally receive a profound philosophical instruction or a complex esoteric koan designed to shatter his conceptual understanding of reality. He prepared his intellect for a deep conversation, ready to analyze any cryptic utterance. Master Hiko gently tapped the rim of the empty bowl with his finger, the sound a clear, resonant clink that cut cleanly through the damp silence of the kitchen, drawing Kenji's attention fully to the simple, unassuming object, forcing him to momentarily drop his mental narrative of spiritual ambition and focus purely on the immediate sensory experience. The master then spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of deep realization. "Kenji, tell me, is this bowl sacred because of the rice it once held, or is it sacred because of its ability to contain the rice?" This question was posed not as a riddle for intellectual unraveling, but as an invitation for Kenji to perceive the inherent value in the vessel itself, regardless of its contents. Kenji, still trapped in the habit of conceptual thinking, began to formulate an elaborate answer concerning the temporary nature of content versus the permanent structure of form, attempting to impress the master with his knowledge of Buddhist metaphysics and the concept of emptiness, shunyata. However, before he could utter a single word of his planned discourse, Master Hiko softly interrupted, his eyes meeting Kenji's with a calm intensity that felt both deeply personal and universally profound, halting the intellectual machinery that so often shielded Kenji from direct experience. The master continued, using the bowl as the central teaching metaphor, explaining that the yearning for enlightenment is akin to the desire for the rice, the glorious, satisfying content, while the practice of attention is the bowl itself, the simple, reliable container that makes the holding possible. He pointed out that Kenji was so desperate to acquire the spiritual rice that he neglected the foundational practice of maintaining the bowl, allowing his mind to become cracked and unstable through impatience and distraction, rendering it unfit to contain anything of true value, even if it were offered. "The great flaw in your seeking, young Kenji," the master said, placing the smooth bowl firmly into the palm of Kenji's hand, "is that you believe peace is a reward for certain actions, found only after the work is done, or through escaping the task entirely. But I tell you, Kenji, the state of your mind during the washing is the only true content of the practice. The meticulous care given to the most insignificant object is the measure of your spiritual dedication." He urged Kenji to recognize that the quality of the practice lay not in what was done, but in the total, absorbed awareness with which it was performed, transforming the act into an expression of the Dharma. Master Hiko then introduced a concise Zen citation that served as both a warning and a guiding light. "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." This simple circular logic bypassed Kenji's complex intellectual structures, emphasizing that the physical tasks do not cease upon realization, but the relationship to those tasks fundamentally changes, removing the internal friction and the sense of compulsory drudgery that Kenji currently experienced. It highlighted that the path and the destination were, in essence, one and the same. The master instructed Kenji to hold the empty bowl, feeling its cool weight and density, noticing the subtle imperfections in the glaze, urging him to simply perceive the object without projecting meaning or rushing ahead to its function. "The bowl is perfect in its emptiness, waiting without expectation," Hiko stated, reminding Kenji that the mind should strive for this same quiet, empty receptivity, allowing the moment to fill it naturally, without the need for constant striving or self-critique. The empty bowl represented the potential of a mind cleared of judgment. He elaborated that when Kenji rushed through the washing, he treated the bowls as if they were already dirty, already dismissed, failing to recognize the simple honor of engaging with the physical world through careful labor, dismissing the very medium through which presence could be cultivated. The master explained that every dish cleaned with full attention cleans not just the ceramic, but also the mind of the practitioner, removing the sticky residues of attachment and aversion that cloud perception. Hiko gently retrieved the bowl, turning it slowly in his hands, highlighting how even the simplest object, when viewed with sustained attention, reveals layers of complexity and beauty, the signature of the potter, the slight unevenness of the rim, the way the light catches the surface. He asked Kenji to consider what true reverence meant, suggesting it was the acknowledgement of the interconnectedness of all things, where the cleaning of a bowl is an expression of deep respect for the food, the community, and the practice itself, connecting the mundane task to the highest spiritual ideals. As Kenji stood there, absorbing the master's silent teaching, the weight of his own impatience felt momentarily heavier than the ceramic bowl he had just held, beginning to understand that the perceived waste of time was, in fact, the most potent fuel for his spiritual growth. Master Hiko concluded the lesson with a soft smile, instructing Kenji to contemplate the emptiness of the bowl and the fullness of attention required to maintain it, setting the stage for Kenji's next assigned task, a practice designed specifically to synchronize the striving mind with the rhythmic demands of the body, the tracing of resistance. The Master Hiko, sensing a subtle shift in Kenji's energy, a dawning comprehension mixed with lingering intellectual defensiveness, gently moved their teaching from the metaphor of the empty bowl to the direct psychological experience of resistance itself, explaining that Kenji's suffering during the dishwashing was not caused by the scrubbing of plates, but by the fierce, internalized struggle against the requirement to scrub them. He instructed the young monk to observe, with the detached curiosity of a scientist, the exact moment the mind begins to rebel against a repetitive or tedious task, urging him to notice the physical manifestation of that resistance. The clenching of the jaw, the shallowing of the breath, the tightening knot that forms between the shoulder blades, recognizing these bodily signals as the true, immediate location of internal conflict. This conscious tracing of the aversion provided a crucial opportunity to transform passive suffering into active, mindful practice. Master Hiko explained that the craving for a better task, a more spiritual activity, or a faster completion time is the engine of duality, constantly pulling the practitioner away from the single, unrepeatable reality of the current moment, trapping the consciousness in a perpetual cycle of dissatisfaction. He elaborated that true liberation doesn't come from finding tasks that are inherently enjoyable or from escaping unpleasant ones, but from dissolving the internal judgment that labels any task as unpleasant in the first place, allowing the mind to rest peacefully within the flow of action, regardless of its perceived glamour or spiritual importance. Kenji was challenged to see the mundane as the ultimate crucible for authentic presence. When you feel the urge to hurry, the master advised, his voice measured and slow, do not fight the feeling, but acknowledge it completely, recognizing it merely as an impulse of the mind, a flicker of conditioned impatience, a nervous energy seeking escape from stillness. Then, intentionally slow your actions down by half, noticing the exact sensation of the reluctance to proceed at a slower pace. This intentional countermotion against the hurried impulse serves as a powerful anchor, drawing the awareness back to the physical body and the immediate sensation of the activity, interrupting the automatic, unconscious drive toward future completion and fostering a deep-rooted commitment to the present step. The master detailed the deep philosophical root of this practice, explaining that in Zen, the concept of samsara, the endless cycle of suffering and rebirth, is not some distant cosmic ordeal, but the moment-to-moment experience of a mind that constantly seeks and rejects, pushing away the undesirable and grasping for the desirable, forever remaining agitated. He suggested that by embracing the full experience of a tedious task, Kenji was learning to cease this push-pull mechanism right here, right now, effectively stepping out of samsara, not by meditating on a mountaintop, but by simply washing a bowl with complete dedication and acceptance of its nature. Hiko encouraged Kenji to become intimately acquainted with the feeling of boredom when it arose, treating the feeling not as a distraction to be overcome, but as a subtle indicator that the mind has drifted from the sensory details of the task and has begun generating internal commentary. He described boredom as the quiet lament of a mind starved of genuine engagement, urging Kenji to respond to this lament by deepening his attention to the simple textures, the coolness of the air on the skin, the exact tension in the muscles needed to lift a heavy object, the nuanced sound of friction, transforming the void of tedium into a profound field of detailed observation. The young monk listened intently, a slight easing noticeable in his usually tight posture, as he began to grasp that the true obstacle was not the volume of dishes or the dust on the floor, but the powerful and persistent internal critic that insisted on judging reality rather than receiving it. The master emphasized that the goal was not to make the resistance disappear, which would be another form of striving, but merely to recognize it clearly without feeding it energy or belief, allowing it to exist as a transient mental phenomenon alongside the awareness of the physical task. Master Hiko offered a metaphor of a muddy river. When the resistance, the mud, rises up, the tendency is to churn the water faster, fretting and hurrying, making the mind even cloudier. The mindful response, however, is to simply stop stirring, allowing the mud to settle naturally, revealing the clear water of intrinsic peace beneath the surface agitation. This process of patient, non-reactive observation is the heart of cultivating a truly spacious and accommodating awareness, one that can hold discomfort without being consumed by it, finding stillness even in the midst of turmoil. The teaching concluded with a gentle directive for Kenji's next task, a specific physical exercise designed to immediately integrate this understanding of resistance and synchronized movement, the simple, foundational practice of sweeping the temple grounds. This activity, Hiko explained, requires continuous, repetitive motion, demanding a steady rhythm and synchronization between breath, body, and implement, leaving no room for the internal struggle Kenji had exhibited during the dishwashing, thus forcing him to directly confront the subtle inner pushback in a new, physically demanding context. The master placed a calloused hand briefly on Kenji's shoulder, a silent gesture of transmission and encouragement, before offering a final, impactful Zen quote for Kenji to carry into his sweeping practice. When walking, walk. When eating, eat. Above all, don't wobble. This koan reinforced the absolute necessity of single-pointed focus, dissolving the internal division between self and task, ensuring that every movement was a complete, contained universe of practice, eliminating the mental gymnastics that waste energy and breed dissatisfaction. This instruction served as the transition, moving Kenji from passive intellectual analysis of his resistance to the active, physical integration of non-resistance, using the whole body as the instrument of awareness. Kenji nodded, finally feeling a genuine sense of curiosity replacing his earlier resentment, ready to face the resistance with the understanding that the true battlefield of practice was not outside in the chores, but inside in the way he related to those chores. The lesson of the broom. Kenji stepped outside into the early morning light, the air cool and faintly scented with pine needles and the damp earth of the temple grounds, clutching the large, coarse-bristled bamboo broom, a tool that felt surprisingly heavy and substantial in his hands. His new task was to sweep the main central courtyard, a vast expanse of meticulously raked gravel bordered by ancient moss-covered stones and perfectly pruned miniature trees. This task required long, rhythmic, and physically demanding effort, a continuous cycle of bending, pushing, pulling and gathering, providing the perfect stage to practice the non-resistant focus Master Hiko had just described, forcing the mind to sync up entirely with the body's steady tempo. He consciously began by slowing his pace significantly, remembering the master's instruction to notice the impulse to rush, starting with the simple awareness of his grip on the smooth, weathered handle of the broom, feeling the slight roughness of the aged wood beneath his palms, and the way the weight was distributed as he lifted and lowered the heavy head. Kenji focused intently on making each sweep a deliberate and complete action, rather than just a hurried means to push the debris from one point to the next, striving to make the movement itself the goal, fully embodying the principle of don't wobble. As he moved the broom across the gravel, Kenji was instructed to listen exclusively to the distinct auditory experience produced by the action, the soft, insistent shh sound of the bamboo bristles dragging against the small, loose stones, a sound that was both repetitive and subtly complex, varying in pitch and volume depending on the pressure applied and the material collected. He was encouraged to allow this rhythmic sound to become the primary object of his meditation, a continuous, unwavering anchor for his consciousness, effectively transforming the sweeping into a mobile form of sonic contemplation. The master had explained that the synchronization of movement and sound creates a powerful feedback loop, pulling the scattered mind directly into the immediate sensory environment, making it impossible to simultaneously dwell on past regrets or future anxieties while maintaining the necessary physical rhythm. Kenji felt the stretch in his lower back and the slight burn in his shoulders, and instead of labeling these sensations as discomfort, he used them as additional anchors, acknowledging the effort without judging it, realizing that the labor itself was grounding his previously restless spirit. He noticed the tiny, fascinating details of the ground that his previous, superficial sweeping had ignored. A single fallen maple leaf, perfectly preserved in its autumn hue. A small, glistening spiderweb stretched taut between two smooth stones. The varying shades of grey and white in the gravel grains. Kenji allowed the beauty of these small elements to enter his awareness without comment, seeing the courtyard not as an obstacle of dirt and dust, but as a complex, vibrant canvas of nature, reflecting the inherent perfection and chaos of the world in miniature. The physical choreography of the sweeping became a powerful meditation on breath, as Kenji experimented with aligning the long, outward push of the broom with a slow, controlled exhalation, and the recovery and repositioning of the body with a deep, deliberate inhalation. This intentional synchronization harnessed the life force of the breath to power the physical task, bringing the body's energy system into harmony with the external movement, achieving a state where the work felt less like effort and more like a gentle, perpetual flow, a profound embodiment of moving meditation, or kinhin. Master Hiko had specifically chosen the open courtyard sweeping for its constant exposure to the elements, teaching Kenji to integrate external distractions, the sudden rush of a cool breeze, the sound of a distant bird call, the shifting intensity of the sunlight, not as hindrances, but as natural components of the present moment. Kenji practiced receiving these external stimuli without reaction, allowing them to pass through his field of awareness while keeping the core focus anchored firmly on the shh of the broom and the physical rhythm of his movement, seeing the world as a seamless tapestry of existence. As the sun climbed higher, warming the stone surfaces, Kenji began to witness the transformation of the courtyard through his labor, the piles of collected dust and leaves accumulating neatly in specific areas, creating small temporary monuments to the process of purification and ordering. This tangible result offered a quiet, non-conceptual satisfaction, an immediate confirmation of the value of sustained, dedicated effort, connecting the inner state of the mind with the external state of the environment in a direct, undeniable feedback loop. The philosophy behind this practice is that through intentional repetition, the activity ceases to be a chore performed by Kenji, but becomes simply an event unfolding through the universe, removing the egoistic identification with the task. He was no longer Kenji who is sweeping, but merely sweeping happening, achieving a deep sense of impersonality and liberation within the action, which is the ultimate goal of Zen practice, to dissolve the boundary between the actor and the action, finding oneness in the continuous present. After nearly an hour, the courtyard lay pristine and immaculate, the gravel evenly patterned and all debris gathered in neat, manageable piles. Kenji rested the broom against the wall, feeling a deep, physical fatigue that was surprisingly clean and restorative, utterly devoid of the mental exhaustion and resentment he had felt during the rushed dishwashing. He realized that the sheer length and repetitiveness of the sweeping had successfully worn down the resistance, allowing his mind to merge completely with the simple, satisfying rhythm of the task, rediscovering the body in motion. Having completed the sweeping task, Kenji felt a profound, satisfying weariness that was wholly unlike the mental fatigue caused by his initial resistance to the dishes, realizing he had crossed a small but significant threshold in his practice, moving beyond the static formality of seated meditation. He understood now that true attention must extend far beyond the cushion, finding its grounding not only in the simple observation of breath at the nostrils, but throughout the entirety of the body's physical architecture as it interacts with the world. The challenge presented by Master Hiko was to transition the deep, concentrated focus he could achieve in stillness into the chaotic, kinetic reality of continuous motion, demanding a complete integration where mind, breath, and action moved as a singular, harmonious entity, making the living body itself the essential, immediate object of contemplation. The next stage involved using the sweeping not merely as a chore, but as an advanced training tool to fully inhabit the physical structure, sensing the complex interplay of hundreds of muscles, joints, and tendons that articulated the movement of the large broom. Kenji was now instructed to focus keenly on the subtle shifts in balance required with each long push and pull, feeling the weight distributing across the soles of his feet and the core muscles stabilizing his torso, noticing the exact degree of tension and release in his arms and shoulders necessary to execute an efficient, rhythmic sweep. This detailed kinesthetic observation transforms vague physical sensation into sharp, precise awareness, revealing the intricate intelligence and responsiveness of the body that usually operates beneath the threshold of conscious thought, making the simple act of sweeping a complex, moment-to-moment exploration of physical mechanics. The cornerstone of this mobile practice was the deliberate synchronization of Kenji's respiratory rhythm with the physical exertion of the sweeping motion, creating a stable, internal tempo that governed the outward activity. He learned to align the powerful, pushing stroke of the broom with a slow, complete exhalation, emptying the lungs fully and releasing any accumulated physical tension, while the recovery phase, drawing the broom back and shifting weight, was paired with a deep, nourishing inhalation that replenished the body's vital energy. This conscious pairing anchors the mind by giving it two simultaneous objects of attention, the breath moving inward and outward, and the movement of the broom through space, thereby eliminating the mental free space where judgment, projection, and distraction thrive, making the action intrinsically meditative. Master Hiko emphasized that the goal of this synchronization was to achieve a state where the action becomes effortless, flowing organically from the breath rather than being driven by muscular force or hurried intention, allowing the body to move with a profound economic grace. When the alignment is perfect, Kenji discovered, the distinct sense of Kenji as the performer of the task begins to dissolve, replaced by a pure, immediate experience of sweeping happening, where the sense of self merges entirely with the dynamic process. This dissolution of the perceived boundary between the internal actor and the external action is a key moment in Zen practice, illustrating that true freedom lies in the selfless commitment to the present event, unburdened by the ego's commentary or desire for completion. To deepen this kinesthetic awareness, Kenji practiced moving the heavy broom at an intentionally reduced pace, slowing his rhythm down to a point where the mind was forced to observe the subtle minutiae of balance and momentum, usually masked by speed. This deliberate slowness created a magnified clarity, allowing him to perceive the exact moment his knee bent, the degree of rotation in his hip, and the shifting tension in his grip, revealing how often the body attempts to rush and cut corners when the mind is impatient. By resisting the urge to quicken the tempo, Kenji cultivated patience not merely as a mental virtue, but as a physical habit, solidifying the realization that the quality of attention is inversely proportional to the speed of execution. He began to see the physical body not as a restrictive container or an inconvenient machine that must be endured, but as a living, immediate landscape of sensations, constantly communicating its state of being, tension, ease, warmth, coolness, and strain, which required careful and non-judgmental navigation. By acknowledging the inevitable aches and fatigue that accompanied the sustained effort, Kenji transformed pain from an adversary to a powerful, immediate anchor for presence, learning to hold the sensation of strain within his vast awareness without allowing the mind to spin stories of complaint or resistance, treating every physical feeling as a transient phenomenon arising and passing away within the unchanging expanse of consciousness. The master reminded Kenji of the ancient teaching: if you want to know the road to enlightenment, look down and sweep the ground. This profound teaching underscores the idea that the grandest spiritual truths are embedded directly within the most humbling and ordinary activities, suggesting that the very process of maintaining and ordering the physical world is fundamentally indistinguishable from ordering and purifying the internal world of the mind. The sweeping practice was a living koan, proving that the sacred space is not confined to the meditation hall, but extends precisely to the space occupied by the practitioner's feet, demanding respect and unwavering commitment to the cleanliness of both the outer courtyard and the inner self. Through continued hours of this deliberate, synchronized movement, Kenji felt a palpable shift in his inner equilibrium. The internal chatter that previously dominated his thoughts quieted down, subdued by the insistent rhythm of the breath and the broom, finding a natural silence born not of suppression, but of complete engagement. The practice solidified the realization that the body is the ultimate tool for anchoring the mind in the now, a dense, undeniable presence that serves as a continuous corrective against the mind's tendency toward abstract thought and distraction, establishing a clear pathway for embodying mindfulness, even in states of dynamic movement. The entire morning passed in this single, repetitive, yet infinitely detailed practice, concluding when the last pile of dust was carefully gathered, leaving the courtyard immaculate and glowing under the midday sun. Kenji experienced a newfound lightness and clarity, understanding that he had successfully transferred the essence of formal meditation, stability, concentration, and non-judgmental observation into a functional, everyday activity. This was the true meaning of walking the path, not ascending to a different plane of existence, but fully descending into the rich texture of this one, finding profound peace right where the work needed to be done. With a final, deep cleansing breath, Kenji gathered the broom and stored it carefully, ensuring it was aligned perfectly with the wall, an act of respect that was now second nature, extending the principles of order and mindfulness even to the tools of his labor. He recognized that the internal architecture of his attention had been fundamentally restructured by the sustained practice, preparing him for the next set of challenges which lay not in the coolness of the morning air, but in the heat and focused activity of the temple kitchen, where the koan of daily bread awaited his mindful participation. The koan of daily bread. The next morning, Kenji was directed to the monastery kitchen, or the tenzo, a space that immediately assaulted his senses with the rich, warm humidity of steam, the complex aroma of simmering broths and freshly chopped vegetables, and the rhythmic, percussive sounds of knives striking cutting boards. This bustling environment presented an entirely new challenge to his nascent mindfulness, moving him from the solitary, rhythmic simplicity of the sweeping courtyard into the demanding communal dynamism of food preparation, where high focus and coordination were essential not only for spiritual practice but for practical necessity and safety. Master Hiko, overseeing the preparation of the midday meal, wore the apron of the tenzo with the same grave dignity he wore his monastic robes, instructing Kenji that the kitchen is traditionally considered one of the most sacred spaces in the Zen temple, often holding a status equal to the main meditation hall. He explained that the act of preparing nourishment is not merely domestic labor, but an act of profound, sustained generosity, a direct transmission of care and life force to the entire community, and therefore demands the highest possible level of attention, reverence, and gratitude from the practitioner, treating every ingredient as a precious resource from the earth. The master handed Kenji a basket overflowing with large, earthy root vegetables, daikon radishes, thick carrots, and purple turnips, and a long, heavy kitchen knife, instructing him on the proper posture and grip, emphasizing that the preparation of food is an opportunity to cultivate a specific kind of focused presence. He stressed that the intention behind the cooking is the most vital ingredient, explaining that if the food is prepared with rushing, resentment, or distraction, that negative energy is subtly infused into the nourishment, affecting the health and spiritual well-being of those who consume it. Kenji was assigned the task of uniformly slicing the hard root vegetables, a task requiring steady precision and unwavering concentration, particularly due to the inherent danger of the razor-sharp blade. Master Hiko used the knife as a potent teaching aid, explaining that the presence of peril is an excellent catalyst for presence, since the slightest lapse in attention could result in injury, thereby grounding the mind instantly in the necessity of the current action. Kenji focused on the cool, solid weight of the blade in his hand, feeling the subtle vibration of the metal, and maintaining a non-reactive, focused gaze upon the exact point where the sharp edge met the vegetable's dense flesh. As he began the repetitive slicing, Kenji was instructed to pay deep attention to the sensory experience of the process itself, noting the distinctive sound each vegetable made when severed, the crisp, resistant thwack of the carrot versus the softer, wetter chunk of the daikon, and observing the immediate burst of earthy scent released as the blade opened the vegetable's interior structure. He focused intensely on the friction between the knife and the board, the precise muscular effort required to maintain a uniform thickness, and the subtle, satisfying feeling of the completed slice falling away neatly, finding the profound meditative rhythm within the repetition of the cut. This rhythmic chopping provided an immediate opportunity to apply the non-resistance learned during sweeping, teaching Kenji to accept the repetitive nature of the task without allowing the mind to drift into anticipation or boredom, recognizing that the act of slicing the 1,000th piece was just as vital and sacred as the first. He worked to maintain the steady, synchronized breathing he had mastered in the courtyard, aligning the downstroke of the knife with his exhalation, turning the repetitive kitchen task into a seamless continuation of his moving meditation practice, ensuring his internal state remained calm, even as the surrounding kitchen environment buzzed with activity. Master Hiko, walking among the junior monks, paused near Kenji and pointed to a slightly uneven piece of carrot that had resulted from a moment of fleeting distraction, explaining that the practice is not about achieving external perfection, a perfectly uniform slice, but about the internal state from which the action arises. He taught that when imperfections inevitably arise, the mindful response is not self-criticism or frustration, but immediate, gentle acceptance, recognizing the crooked slice as merely a reflection of the mind's momentary wobble, and then returning the full, non-judgmental attention to the next cut, finding the path of equanimity in imperfection. The lesson extended into the profound Zen teaching that even the simplest preparation, the meticulous peeling of an apple, the careful measurement of rice, the precise cutting of a root vegetable, is an expression of the Buddha nature, demonstrating that enlightenment is not found in esoteric doctrines, but in the fully inhabited reality of the everyday moment. The master often quoted the influential Zen figure Dogen, who wrote extensively on the crucial role of the cook, stressing that the tenzo must handle every ingredient with the care and reverence one would accord to the most sacred treasures, transforming mundane tasks into acts of ultimate spiritual cultivation. As the morning progressed, Kenji's rhythm became steady and precise, the repetitive chop-chop-chop sound of his knife blending harmoniously with the sounds of the bustling kitchen, and he experienced the clear realization that the preparation of food required a level of unified focus, far exceeding that of quiet meditation. The tangible weight of responsibility, the community depended on this food, and the physical presence of the sharp knife acted as unrelenting spiritual teachers, forcing Kenji's attention to remain fully embodied and anchored in the here and now, experiencing the immense sacredness inherent in the provision of daily sustenance. Kenji concluded his task with a profound sense of satisfaction, his hands weary, but his mind clear and sharp, having successfully transformed a mountain of raw, dense vegetables into neat, uniform pieces ready for the pot. This achievement was not merely culinary, it was the realization of the koan of daily bread, that the path to awakening is not paved with abstractions, but with the material reality of selfless, careful labor, understanding that true presence is the gift one offers to the world through the integrity of every single action, regardless of how ordinary it may appear. The sensation of the blade and the cut. Having fully immersed himself in the bustling environment of the Tenzo kitchen, Kenji was now ready to deepen his focus on the singular relationship between himself, the raw ingredient, and the precise tool of transformation, the knife, a relationship Master Hiko stressed was inherently spiritual because of the demand for absolute, unwavering presence. The danger of the sharp blade, gleaming faintly under the natural light streaming through the high kitchen windows, served as a profound and immediate catalyst for mindfulness, stripping away any space for mental wandering or abstraction, compelling Kenji's entire being to anchor in the immediacy of the task. He focused intensely on the physical properties of the blade, its substantial, cool weight anchoring his hand, the specific balance point along the tang, and the smooth, polished handle that connected the steel directly to his palm, recognizing this object not merely as an instrument of utility, but as a silent, formidable teacher of exactness and respect. Master Hiko instructed Kenji to slow the cutting rhythm even further than before, moving beyond mere efficiency to a state of heightened sensory awareness where every single stroke of the blade was experienced as a complete, focused event, isolated in time and space. Kenji closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply, and then brought his full attention to the moment the steel edge made contact with the tough outer skin of a large daikon radish, feeling the initial resistance give way with a soft, yielding give as the razor-sharp edge penetrated the flesh. He observed the subtle physical vibration that traveled up the wooden handle and into his hand as the knife passed through the dense root, a tiny tremor that communicated the texture and consistency of the material being altered, deepening his appreciation for the physical conversation happening between his body and the world. The philosophical implication of this practice, as explained by the master, was that the precision demanded by the knife reflected the precision required in mental cultivation. Just as a dull knife mangles the vegetable, a dull or distracted mind mangles the moment, failing to realize the clean, true cut of reality. Kenji learned to cultivate a soft, yet intensely focused gaze upon the exact point of contact, ensuring that his eyes, hands, and breath were all perfectly aligned in the service of the cut, ensuring that the finished slice was not merely uniform in size but flawless in its execution, representing a pure manifestation of unclouded attention. This commitment transformed the act of cutting from a simple preparation method into a sustained, minute-by-minute meditation on non-duality and perfect effort. Kenji began to notice the astonishing variety in textures, even within the same vegetable, observing how the knife moved through the dense, firm center of the carrot differently than it did through the softer, spongier periphery, demanding subtle, instantaneous adjustments in pressure and angle from his guiding hand. The concentrated effort required to maintain this level of sensitivity prohibited any thoughts of the past or future. The only reality that existed was the weight of the steel, the texture of the vegetable beneath his fingers, and the brief, satisfying sound of the clean separation as the slice fell onto the pile. This forced immersion in the physical world was, paradoxically, the fastest route to transcending mental constructs, proving that enlightenment could indeed be found within the rhythmic necessity of domestic labor. The master often quoted an obscure Zen poet who once described the ideal kitchen practice as slicing the wind into edible pieces, emphasizing the paradoxical nature of the activity, giving form and substance to the formless present moment through dedicated, skilled action. Kenji learned that the true skill was not just in making a straight cut, but in maintaining a state of equanimity and acceptance when the cut inevitably went slightly awry, resisting the common tendency to react with irritation or self-judgment. He practiced immediately returning his full focus to the next cut, allowing the imperfection of the past slice to dissolve without residue, cultivating a profound sense of self-forgiveness and renewal moment by moment, which is the cornerstone of all Buddhist practice. He also paid meticulous attention to the arrangement of his hands, practicing the protective bear claw grip used to steady the vegetable while shielding the fingertips, recognizing that this position required absolute trust in the controlled movement of the blade. This physical posture mirrored the mental state required in meditation: strong grounding, protective awareness, and a willingness to be completely vulnerable to the present experience, understanding that safety and effectiveness arise from conscious technique, not from accidental luck. The repetitive motion, once a source of annoyance, now became a powerful, predictable anchor, gently pulling his mind back from any fleeting distraction whenever it tried to surface. The sensory details became amplified. The cooling moisture left on the cutting board by the sliced radishes, the slightly sticky residue accumulating on the knife blade, requiring conscious pausing to wipe it clean, and the subtle warmth radiating from the stove across the busy kitchen. Every single sensation was treated as a reminder to be present, transforming the sensory overload of the kitchen environment from a source of distraction into a multi-layered object of meditation, where the sounds of bubbling water and the scrape of spoons were woven into the tapestry of his practice rather than being excluded from it. Master Hiko explained that the profound benefit of working with the knife was the lesson in non-attachment to the finished product, teaching Kenji to dedicate his energy fully to the process of the cutting itself, without obsessing over the final outcome of the dish or the immediate approval of the community. The reward was not the pile of perfectly sliced vegetables, but the clarity and peace experienced within the act of cutting, embodying the core Zen teaching that the path is the goal, and that true spiritual fulfillment is located exclusively within the sustained integrity of the immediate action. Kenji felt a distinct physical sensation of grounding as he worked, realizing that the solid presence of the knife in his hand and the dense resistance of the earth-grown vegetables provided an undeniable physical tether to the material reality of the world, preventing the mind from floating off into airy concepts or abstract notions of enlightenment. This concrete grounding proved far more effective for concentration than simply sitting still, as the continuous, subtle demand for precision and coordination forced his awareness to remain fully embodied and highly alert, generating a vivid, penetrating clarity that was entirely new to his practice. As the last carrot was sliced and placed neatly into a communal bowl, Kenji consciously released his grip on the knife, washed it thoroughly, and placed it back on the magnetic rack with profound reverence, recognizing it as a formidable ally in his practice. He understood that the lesson of the blade was the lesson of life, demanding careful handling, respecting boundaries, and utilizing focused intention to create order and sustenance from the raw chaos of existence, preparing him for the next stage of practice, which involved integrating this concentrated focus into the seemingly unstructured moments between tasks. The walking practice, kinhin, in routine. With the intensive, highly focused activity of the vegetable preparation complete, Kenji transitioned from the static focus of cutting to the more dynamic challenge of moving mindfully through the demanding environment of the temple, learning the concept of kinhin, or walking meditation, as applied to the most mundane aspects of transition. Master Hiko pointed out that most practitioners rush heedlessly through the spaces between tasks, walking from the kitchen to the dining hall or from the zendo to the library, treating this time as merely an empty void to be quickly traversed before reaching the next important activity. The master, however, instructed Kenji to transform these interstitial moments into the practice itself, recognizing that the journey holds as much sacred potential as the destination. Master Hiko explained the traditional form of kinhin, emphasizing the incredibly slow, deliberate, and measured pace used in the meditation hall, where the practitioner focuses minutely on the movement of the feet, the shifting weight, and the precise rise and fall of the heel and toe. The new challenge for Kenji, however, was to apply the essence of this deep slowness and complete attention to the quicker, more functional pace required to navigate the temple grounds, maintaining a practical speed while simultaneously embodying the meditative awareness of the movement. He had to find the elusive equilibrium between focused practice and functional necessity, ensuring that his internal state remained calm even as his external speed increased. Kenji began by consciously marking the boundaries of his moving practice, taking a deep breath and gently reminding himself, "Now I am walking mindfully," before stepping away from the kitchen counter toward the storage room, making the transition itself a deliberate ritual. He focused his awareness deeply into the soles of his feet, sensing the exact pressure applied with each step and the subtle texture of the wooden floorboards beneath his sandals, resisting the habitual tendency of the mind to immediately jump ahead to the task awaiting him in the next room. The goal was not to arrive quickly, but to fully inhabit the distance being covered, appreciating the dynamic physical effort involved in sustaining locomotion. The instruction emphasized the integration of breath and pace. Kenji was to find a natural, steady rhythm where the breath and the footsteps moved in a harmonious relationship, perhaps taking 3 complete steps on the inhalation and 3 steps on the exhalation, thus utilizing the body's natural locomotion to stabilize and pace the breath. This synchronization transformed the otherwise mechanical act of walking into a continuous flowing form of moving prayer, allowing the rhythm of his feet to anchor his awareness and gently dissolve the inevitable surge of planning or projection that habitually accompanies transitional moments. As he walked, Kenji practiced the art of peripheral vision awareness, keeping his gaze softly downcast about 10 feet ahead, maintaining a calm, focused posture that minimized internal distraction while remaining aware of the environment around him, the light falling on the path, the slight scent of damp earth, or the sound of distant temple bells. He consciously registered the subtle movements of his hands and arms swinging gently by his sides, treating every minor physical sensation, from the brush of the fabric against his legs to the gentle warmth of the sun on his neck, as non-judgmental feedback about his current state of presence. Master Hiko taught Kenji that the space between tasks, the walk across the courtyard, the trip to the well, the simple action of standing up from the cushion, is often the point where spiritual discipline collapses, allowing the mind to revert to its default state of haste, worry, or commentary. By transforming these transitional voids into fully inhabited practices, Kenji was learning to eliminate the distinction between meditation time and everyday life, realizing that sustained practice is not about intensity for short periods, but about the seamless integration of presence into the totality of one's existence. During one walk to fetch fresh herbs from the garden, Kenji noticed a distinct feeling of impatience rising in his chest, a subtle urge to accelerate his pace to get the task over with so he could return to the structured intensity of the kitchen. Instead of suppressing this feeling, he paused briefly, acknowledged the impatience as merely a passing mental phenomenon, and consciously softened his shoulders and lengthened his spine, gently slowing his pace further until the mental agitation naturally subsided, demonstrating that the walking practice provided immediate feedback and an opportunity for correction. The master praised this small act of recognition, reminding Kenji that the ultimate aim of walking meditation is to cultivate the ability to move through the world while retaining the internal stillness of seated meditation, to be actively engaged externally while remaining fundamentally unmoved internally, carrying the sacred silence of the Zendo into the chaotic reality of the garden path. This ability to be simultaneously still and moving is the hallmark of advanced Zen practice, signifying a mind that is stable, alert, and wholly available to the present circumstance. Kenji found that this deliberate, embodied movement created a profound sense of continuity between his various duties, binding the acts of chopping, sweeping, and sitting into a unified stream of attentive practice, eliminating the mental fragmentation that once characterized his day. The simple act of traversing the temple grounds, once dismissed as meaningless filler, now became a vibrant and essential spiritual discipline, providing a continuous anchor that grounded him in the tangible reality of the earth beneath his feet. As Kenji returned to the bustling kitchen, carrying the fragrant bundle of fresh basil, he consciously maintained the rhythmic, embodied awareness cultivated during his walk, allowing the peace of the walking practice to permeate the renewed focus required by the next stage of food preparation. He understood that the true practice was not the grand ceremony, but the seamless flow of attention from one mundane, necessary act to the next, embracing the entire day as a continuous, unbroken sequence of opportunities for awakening, the act of folding clothes. Following the physical engagement of kitchen work and the embodied awareness of Kinhin, Kenji was now assigned a task that required meticulous precision, softness, and patient repetition. Folding the heavy, newly cleaned monastic robes and the communal blankets used during the cold early morning sittings, an activity that Master Hiko presented not as mere domestic chore, but as a profound exercise in mental reflection and physical dedication. The Master explained that just as we seek to align the inner contours of our minds into a state of ordered clarity, we must physically reflect that intention by bringing perfect order and geometric harmony to the items we wear and use closest to our bodies, treating the fabric with the same reverence one would afford a sacred text or a delicate artifact. Kenji approached the towering stack of garments, noticing the varying textures, the crisp, starched feel of the freshly laundered cotton robes contrasted sharply with the weighty, soft wool of the sleeping blankets, and resolved to give each piece his complete, undivided presence. The true difficulty of the practice lay not in the complexity of the folds, which were simple and uniform, but in maintaining unwavering, intense attention through the hundreds of repetitive motions required to complete the pile, resisting the insidious mental lure of impatience and distraction that thrives on monotony. Kenji began to feel the fabric between his fingertips, savoring the cool, clean scent of the sun and air absorbed by the material during the drying process, ensuring that his touch was always gentle, never hasty or aggressive, reflecting the compassionate attitude required toward the self and others. He focused acutely on aligning the edges of the fabric, feeling the satisfying substantiality of the seam as he matched the opposing corners perfectly, creating taut, crisp, right angles that mirrored the disciplined structure of the monastic life. Master Hiko observed Kenji's work, emphasizing the necessity of precision, noting that a careless fold leads to a wrinkled robe, which is a physical manifestation of a cluttered, untidy mind that cannot maintain its focus in daily life. Kenji learned to identify the subtle tension that arose in his shoulders and brow when an edge failed to align perfectly, and he practiced releasing that physical tension immediately, treating the minor imperfection of the fold not as a personal failure, but simply as an opportunity to gently adjust and return to the moment, reinforcing the core Buddhist concept that the practice of immediate correction and non-judgmental return is the essence of mindfulness. The folding process itself became a slow, deliberate choreography of movement, spreading the garment flat on the polished wooden floor with a sweeping, respectful motion, smoothing out every wrinkle with the palm of his hand, and then bringing the extremities together in a single, sustained action, focusing not just on the outcome, but on the exact path the fabric traveled through the air. This meticulous attention to movement and stillness transformed the mundane labor into a highly aesthetic, meditative form, where the resulting stack of perfectly uniform rectangles represented a physical landscape of his sustained effort and clarity of intention, a tangible testament to the power of presence. As Kenji completed the folding of the heavy wool blankets, he concentrated on the dense weight of the material and the satisfying thud as the finished square was placed gently onto the growing stack, recognizing that this weight represented the comforting, predictable structure of the Sangha community that supported his spiritual journey. He noted the warmth radiating slightly from the heavy fabric, understanding that the discipline of folding was an act of preparing comfort and order not just for himself, but for every member of the temple, embedding the practice within the larger framework of selfless service, or dana. The philosophical lesson embedded within the practice was the understanding that small things matter tremendously, emphasizing that the state of one's spiritual practice is often best revealed not in the height of grand meditation, but in the meticulousness applied to the seemingly insignificant details of everyday life. If one cannot apply full attention to aligning a simple corner of cloth, how can one expect to maintain penetrating clarity when faced with complex philosophical dilemmas or deep emotional crises? Kenji realized that the folding task was a foundational training ground for attention, building the mental muscle required for sustained concentration. Furthermore, Kenji realized that the repetitive, almost hypnotic quality of folding was deeply soothing, allowing the critical, judgmental part of his mind to gradually quiet down as the rhythmic movement took over, creating a space of inner peace that was independent of thought. The consistent tactile sensation of the smooth cloth passing beneath his fingers acted as a gentle, unwavering anchor, keeping his awareness grounded in the tangible reality of the present moment, dissolving the mental habit of seeking stimulation or complexity where only simple, honest effort was required. He began to see the crease in the folded cloth as the line of demarcation between the past and the future, where the attention must reside exactly on the line itself, the present moment of action, ensuring that the fabric on either side was treated with equal care and respect. This visual metaphor provided a concrete way to understand the abstract concept of mindfulness. The perfect fold requires simultaneous awareness of both sides, representing the integration of sensory input into a unified, singular point of attention, preventing the mind from splitting into the common dualities of liking or disliking the task. The sheer volume of robes and blankets demanded stamina and resilience, forcing Kenji to confront and move past the initial waves of boredom and physical fatigue that inevitably arose after the first hour of steady work, teaching him that endurance in practice is fundamentally rooted in patience and a gentle, persistent return to the task at hand. He realized that the true practice was learning to sustain a high-quality, focused presence over a long duration, transforming the sheer length of the task from a burden into a powerful opportunity to deepen his mental fortitude and emotional equanimity. Finally, upon finishing the neat, orderly stack, Kenji felt a profound sense of quiet satisfaction, not the ego-driven pride of accomplishment, but the deep, stable contentment that arises from having given oneself entirely to a necessary task without reservation or escape. The perfectly aligned pile of textiles stood as a silent, physical embodiment of the calm and order he had cultivated within his mind, confirming that the spiritual path does not bypass the mundane, but runs directly through the meticulous execution of daily life. The teaching of Master Dogen on water. As Kenji concluded the task of folding and prepared to assist with the deep cleaning of the temple floors, a task requiring large volumes of water, Master Hiko paused to share a profound, and often overlooked teaching from the foundational Zen figure, Master Dogen, regarding the spiritual significance of water in the monastic life, a teaching that elevates the act of cleaning far beyond mere sanitation. Dogen's writings compel practitioners to treat even the most abundant and seemingly ordinary resources, like the rinsing water used for washing rice or the water used for scrubbing stones, with the same meticulous reverence reserved for the most precious and sacred substances, such as rare elixirs or consecrated oil. This practice of revering the common elevates the mind from a state of wasteful casualness to one of profound, sustained gratitude. Master Hiko drew Kenji's attention to the large wooden buckets of fresh water drawn from the well, emphasizing the crystalline clarity and the cool, earthy scent of the well water, instructing him to observe the water itself not as a tool for cleaning, but as an entity possessing its own spiritual integrity and life force, reminding Kenji that water is the fundamental element sustaining all life within and outside the temple walls. The master explained that carelessly splashing water, allowing it to go stagnant, or using it without full attention is not just inefficiency, but a failure of respect toward the interconnected web of existence, a practice of deep neglect for the resources provided by the natural world. The lesson extended beyond mere conservation. It was about cultivating a mindset where everything encountered in the world, from the smallest drop of dew on a mossy stone to the vast ocean of philosophical teachings, is viewed through the lens of profound sacredness. When Kenji dipped the large cleaning cloth into the cool water, he was instructed to feel the water's temperature and density, to hear the subtle, soft sound of the fabric absorbing the liquid, and to move the bucket with gentle, measured steps, ensuring that not a single drop was spilled unnecessarily onto the path. This slow, deliberate handling of the water forces the mind to stay anchored in the physical reality of the moment, preventing the rush that leads to waste and distraction. Master Hiko recited an ancient poem that spoke of the moon reflected perfectly in a tiny basin of water, illustrating how the vastness of universal truth can be fully contained and reflected within the smallest, most immediate circumstance, provided the container, the mind, is still and clear. Kenji realized that the very act of cleaning the temple floors with attentive use of water was an attempt to make the mind's container equally clear and still, allowing the reflection of reality to appear without distortion caused by internal agitation or careless disregard. The scrubbing of the wooden floorboards became a sustained meditative rhythm, the sound of the wet cloth moving across the grain, the fresh, clean smell of the wet wood, and the feel of his knees pressing gently against the hard, supportive floor. Kenji focused on treating the dirty water as it was emptied, not with disgust, but with a detached respect, recognizing that the impurity it carried represented the accumulated distractions and defilements of the mind being carefully carried away, transforming the disposal of the used water into a powerful metaphor for spiritual purification. The master noted that by handling the cleaning water with the same care one might handle ceremonial tea, Kenji was actively dissolving the mental hierarchies that categorize tasks as important or unimportant, realizing that every single action, regardless of its mundanity, holds the identical potential for awakening if performed with total presence and reverence. This comprehensive attention to detail is what distinguishes Zen practice from ordinary life, the intentional elevation of the commonplace to the level of the sacred. Kenji began to observe the light filtering through the high windows, noting how the shafts of sunlight played upon the damp surfaces of the freshly scrubbed floor, making the water droplets sparkle briefly before being absorbed into the wood, visualizing this process as the fleeting nature of all phenomena, including his own thoughts and sensations. The water, the cloth, the wood, and his own body were all temporarily merging in the single, sustained effort of purification, an intimate, non-dualistic communion with the elements themselves. The realization settled deeply within him. True devotion is not expressed solely through formal prayer or lofty contemplation, but through the consistent, tangible respect shown to the resources that sustain life, the air we breathe, the food we eat, and the water we use. This commitment to honoring the ordinary creates a powerful, unbroken chain of presence throughout the day, ensuring that the meditative mind is never truly off duty, but is always engaged in the careful stewardship of the moment. By the time the floors were dry and shining, Kenji felt a lightness and clarity that transcended mere physical cleanliness. He had not simply cleaned the floor, he had purified his attention, using the water as his gentle teacher, anchoring his mind firmly in the reality of the tactile, sensory world, prepared now to face the unavoidable sounds of the bustling world outside the temple walls while maintaining this newly found internal stillness. The silence in the noise of the city. Having completed the meticulous, quiet task of cleaning the water and sweeping the floors, Kenji found his inner clarity immediately challenged by the relentless, abrasive symphony of the urban world located just beyond the temple's modest wooden walls, a profound contrast to the pristine stillness he had so painstakingly cultivated through his disciplined practice. The temple, despite its ancient roots and spiritual focus, was situated near a relatively busy municipal road, meaning that the serene echoes of the bell often had to compete directly with the low, grinding hum of commercial vehicles, the sporadic, sharp blasts of horns, and the sustained roar of engines accelerating on the asphalt, creating a soundscape that Kenji initially perceived as the greatest enemy to his nascent, fragile concentration. He watched the light tremble slightly on the altar as a heavy delivery truck rumbled past, and felt a wave of familiar frustration rise within him, equating the spiritual quality of his practice with the ability to maintain absolute, external silence. Kenji wrestled internally with the sounds, recognizing that his mind was instantly labeling the noise as an interruption, an unwanted intrusion that aggressively pulled his attention away from the calm center he had just established, manifesting as a subtle tightening resistance in his jaw and shoulders. He discovered that the attempt to block out the noise, a common but ultimately futile strategy, required enormous mental energy, creating a stressful internal friction between his desire for quietude and the undeniable reality of the present moment, trapping him in a cycle of aversion every time a particularly loud motorcycle broke the meditative atmosphere. He realized that this aversion was causing more actual suffering than the sound itself, which was merely a neutral vibration, while his internal resistance provided the emotional fuel for agitation and dissatisfaction. Master Hiko, noticing the troubled set of Kenji's shoulders as a bus air-braked loudly nearby, reminded him that seeking stillness by avoiding sound is the practice of a hermit, not a householder or a fully engaged monk, and that true, unbreakable peace must be found precisely within the relentless, chaotic flow of sensory input. The master explained that the external world is not a mistake that needs to be corrected or silenced, but is rather the perfect living teaching environment, where every sharp, sudden noise is merely an opportunity to observe the mind's habitual reaction of judgment and resistance, making the busy city street an unexpectedly effective, rigorous school for cultivating non-reactivity and ultimate acceptance. The master instructed Kenji to treat the sounds not as objects of annoyance, but simply as transient phenomena, emphasizing the fundamental Buddhist truth of anicca, or impermanence, which is perfectly demonstrated by the lifespan of any given sound event. It arises abruptly, sustains itself for a fleeting moment, and then inevitably dissolves back into silence without leaving any permanent trace. Kenji began the difficult practice of tracking the trajectory of a specific car horn, for example, noting the exact moment the vibration began, the peak of its intensity, and its final, graceful decay, understanding that his thoughts, feelings, and the entire material world follow the exact same pattern of arising and passing away, turning the external chaos into a potent, repeated lesson in letting go. With this new frame of understanding, Kenji attempted to listen to the traffic without applying the mental filter of liking or disliking, stripping the sound of its cultural and emotional context, and experiencing it purely as raw auditory data, a complex wave of varying frequency and pressure hitting his eardrums. He practiced maintaining the same detached, non-judgmental awareness toward the deep rumble of a passing diesel engine as he did toward the soft rustle of leaves, treating both extremes of auditory experience with equanimity, realizing that the sound possessed no inherent quality of disturbance until his mind chose to assign it that negative label. The external noise, therefore, transitioned from being a distraction to becoming a steadfast anchor for the present moment, a constantly shifting dynamic focal point that demanded continuous, high-level attention from Kenji, forcing him to remain highly responsive without becoming reactive or emotionally entangled. Whenever his attention began to wander into planning or daydreaming, a sudden screech of tires or the shouted voice of a distant vendor immediately and effectively yanked his awareness back to the vibrating, inescapable reality of the now, teaching him that the environment, far from hindering his practice, was in fact collaborating with him to maintain vigilance. Master Hiko introduced a poignant Zen saying related to this challenge, often recited by ancient masters who lived near marketplaces. If you cannot find tranquility in the center of the world's market, you will not find it in the deepest cave. Illustrating that genuine, robust tranquility must be portable and independent of external conditions, capable of weathering any storm of sound or sensation. Kenji realized that the goal was not to make the world quiet, which is impossible, but to make his reaction to the world quiet, to find that fundamental silent ground of awareness that remains untouched and undisturbed beneath all the surface noise and mental chatter. Through sustained, patient practice, Kenji began to integrate the layers of sound into a single, comprehensive tapestry of life, distinguishing the distant rhythmic hum of the city's pulse from the sharp, immediate sound of a dog barking close by, yet holding all these sonic elements in the vast, accommodating space of his awareness. This full acceptance of the external soundscape resulted in a surprising and deep internal silence, a quietude that did not depend on the absence of noise, but on the cessation of his inner battle against it, dissolving the artificial boundary between the inner stillness of the temple and the turbulent energy of the outside world. He recognized that the chaotic, repetitive sounds of the traffic were profound symbols of impermanence. Each engine roar was born, lived, and died within seconds, mirroring the entire cycle of existence, and by leaning into the fleeting nature of the sound, he practiced letting go of his attachment to stability and predictability. This allowed a deep, foundational relaxation to settle into his body and mind, as the frantic energy previously spent on resistance was channeled into mindful, unwavering attention to the sensory data of the present moment, creating a stable core of observation amidst the flux. As the sun began to set, casting long, peaceful shadows over the polished temple grounds, Kenji sat for a period of formal meditation, and though the sounds of the evening traffic continued their steady flow, they no longer felt like invaders. but rather gentle reminders of the world's ceaseless movement, no more disturbing than the sound of his own breath. He understood that the true silence he sought was not an auditory phenomenon, but a state of mind, a deep inner listening that could simultaneously acknowledge the external noise while resting completely in its own silent, immutable core, a powerful skill he would carry with him into the simplest of tasks. The rule of shoe alignment. Following the rigorous exercise of finding stillness amidst the city's noisy clamor, Master Hiko directed Kenji's attention to the temple's genkan, the critical transitional space where the exterior world of mud, hurry, and casual engagement meets the intentional, contained sacredness of the temple grounds, emphasizing that this threshold is one of the most potent places for the practice of profound mindfulness. The master explained that the way we treat the objects that facilitate our entry and exit, specifically the communal collection of Gita and worn leather shoes, reveals the underlying state of our mind and the depth of our commitment to attention, as the tendency is always to rush the transition, thereby losing precious seconds of awareness. The specific task assigned to Kenji was deceptively simple, but demanded meticulous, uncompromising precision, ensuring that every single pair of shoes belonging to the resident monks and any lingering visitors was perfectly aligned in neat, orderly rows along the smooth wooden step, with each shoe precisely parallel to its neighbors and flawlessly aligned with the wall, and most importantly, with every pair facing outward toward the entrance so they were ready for immediate, effortless wear. When leaving the temple. This practice, often called ojishogi in some temples, transformed the mundane act of tidying into an aesthetic and spiritual discipline, a tangible reflection of inner order. Kenji began his work slowly, kneeling on the cool floor, recognizing that his initial impulse was to quickly push the shoes into a general vicinity of order, but resisting this impatience and instead focusing on the sensory details of each individual piece he handled. He felt the worn, heavy texture of the wooden soles, the pliable smoothness of old leather, and even the dry scent of dust and earth clinging to the bottom of the sandals, treating each object with a gentle reverence, adjusting its position with measured, deliberate movements, until the tips of the shoes formed an unbroken, perfectly straight line across the entire length of the entrance hall. Master Hiko watched with approval, noting that the disorder of the shoes, pairs askew, one shoe flopped onto its side, the heels not parallel, was a direct external symbol of a careless, distracted mind that is prone to mental tripping and confusion when faced with life's demands, perpetually unprepared for the next moment. By contrast, establishing external order in this threshold space, making the movement of leaving and entering smooth, predictable, and aesthetically pleasing, cultivates an equivalent sense of inner readiness and calm preparedness, ensuring that the monk's mind does not stumble when moving between the formal practice space and the exigencies of daily life. The seemingly small, trivial detail of aligning a shoe, the master elucidated, is in fact a foundational act of generosity and communal service, as the orderly arrangement benefits every person who uses the genkan, creating a frictionless transition for the entire community, allowing them to depart and return without the subtle irritation of searching for a missing shoe or tripping over a misplaced sandal. This act demonstrated that mindfulness is never purely a self-centered pursuit, but is inherently intertwined with the welfare and ease of others, embedding the daily tasks within the broader ethical framework of selfless, compassionate action, known as Jiju Yumonyu. Kenji realized that the practice was specifically designed to slow down the moment of transition, the time when the mind is most likely to lapse into automatism and haste, forcing him to pause at the very boundary between the external world of activity and the internal world of quiet introspection. By committing his full attention to the position of a simple shoe, he was consciously asserting his intention to carry the stillness and concentration cultivated during seated meditation into the movements of his daily life, refusing to allow the transition to be governed by unthinking habit. He encountered one particularly worn pair of geta that belonged to an older monk, noticing the deep patina and the precise wear patterns on the wooden sole, which spoke volumes about the owner's own long history of walking meditation and dedicated service, treating this worn footwear as a direct historical artifact of a life lived mindfully. Kenji adjusted the pair with extra care, ensuring their alignment was immaculate, seeing this small act as a silent bow of respect and acknowledgement to the lineage and discipline embodied by the elderly monk's long journey on the path. The profound lesson here, as often emphasized in Zen tradition, is that enlightenment is not a mystical occurrence reserved for mountaintop hermits, but is fundamentally manifested in the perfect silent execution of extremely ordinary tasks, recognizing that the Buddha nature resides just as fully and perfectly in the alignment of two pieces of worn wood as it does in the highest philosophical treatise. When attention is applied completely, the distinction between the sacred and the profane utterly dissolves, leaving only the pure, vivid reality of the present moment. Upon stepping back to survey his finished work, Kenji experienced the immediate and satisfying feedback loop created by the flawlessly ordered rouse. The visual harmony was instantly reflected in a quiet settling of his internal landscape, a profound, non-verbal affirmation that the mind and the environment are inextricably linked. The tidy Genkan provided a sense of visual rest and mental clarity, preparing him for the next equally important challenge of confronting the internal resistance that often arises during periods of intense repetition. With the shoes standing ready and facing the world, reflecting the monk's preparedness for mindful engagement, Kenji felt a solid anchor of presence established within his core, understanding that this simple act of external orderliness was a powerful spiritual protection, ensuring that the distractions of the world would not easily penetrate the organized clarity he had created, readying himself to accept the next philosophical challenge with an open, quiet, and fully aligned mind. Accepting boredom as a friend. After successfully mastering the external organization of the shoes and the alignment of the physical space, Kenji encountered a far more subtle and insidious opponent that arose not from external noise or chaos, but from the deep internal resistance to the simple act of repetition, the pervasive feeling of boredom. The master assigned him the task of spending an entire morning polishing the aged wooden veranda that surrounded the main hall, a job demanding hours of continuous, cyclical motion, using only a soft cloth and a fragrant beeswax-based polish, an activity utterly devoid of variation or external stimulus, which quickly provoked an intense and restless seeking within his mind. Kenji felt an immediate, uncomfortable physical sensation, a prickly agitation beneath his skin, a desire to fidget, and a strong mental urge to abandon the polish and rush off to perform some task he perceived as more intellectually stimulating or spiritually rewarding, demonstrating the deeply ingrained aversion to monotony. He observed that the physical sensation of boredom was merely the superficial manifestation of his mind's deeply conditioned craving for novelty and excitement, an aggressive protest against the quiet stability of the present moment, proving that the mind prefers the distraction of anxiety or planning over the silent, unadorned reality of the task at hand. His thoughts began to spiral wildly, rehearsing old arguments, inventing dramatic scenarios for the future, or dwelling obsessively on the next meal, all frantic attempts by the ego to escape the humbling, repetitive rhythm of the polishing cloth moving back and forth across the same stretch of wood, revealing that the true suffering was not in the labor itself, but in the internal narrative that judged the labor as insignificant or tiresome. Master Hiko, perceiving the subtle tension in Kenji's shoulders and the slightly hurried pace of his movements, approached him with a calm smile and gently explained that boredom is not a flaw inherent in the task, but a shadow cast by the mind's refusal to settle, functioning as a powerful teacher that illuminates our deep-seated attachment to continuous mental stimulation and external reward. The master articulated that when we encounter resistance in the form of tedium, we are provided with a crucial opportunity to practice radical acceptance, allowing the restless energy to simply be there without fueling it with narrative or immediately seeking escape, thereby dissolving the illusion that satisfaction must always come from excitement rather than profound simplicity. Under the master's calm guidance, Kenji was instructed to consciously sink his awareness into the minute, tactile reality of the task, treating the polishing not as a means to a shiny floor, but as the sole, complete purpose of the universe in that moment, using the very monotony to sharpen his focus. He forced his full attention onto the detailed texture of the wood grain passing beneath the moving cloth, tracking the exact point where the dullness began to yield to the emerging, deep luster brought forth by the friction, striving to perceive the subtle, shifting variations in light and shadow, rather than allowing the mind to treat the entire endeavor as a uniform, undifferentiated blur of repetition. As he deepened his attention, the sensory experience transformed, moving far beyond mere visual observation, allowing him to perceive the unique, faintly sweet scent of the melting beeswax rising up as the heat from the friction warmed the surface. And he focused intently on the delicate, rhythmic sound the soft cotton cloth made, a low, sustained whisper against the hard, smooth surface of the aged wood. He began to synchronize his breath with the sweeping movement of his arm, finding a hypnotic, steady rhythm that calmed his internal state, realizing that the task was asking nothing more of him than his simple, unwavering presence, dissolving the superficial feeling of boredom into a flow state characterized by quiet, effortless engagement. The master later emphasized that the discipline of Zen teaches us that the feeling of boredom is a subtle form of mental clinging. The mind is clinging to a preferred state of excitement or distraction, and when that preference is denied by the reality of the repetitive work, suffering arises, and therefore, welcoming the feeling of tedium with open curiosity is an essential practice of non-attachment, directly undermining the ego's demand for constant novelty. This practice trains the mind to find a deep, underlying contentment that is independent of external factors, transforming the potentially mind-numbing repetition into a grounding ritual that reveals the inexhaustible beauty of the ordinary. Reflecting on this transformative insight, Kenji remembered a quiet, powerful saying, often attributed to the ancient monastics who dedicated their lives to service. The work of profound boredom is the purest work, for it carries no expectation of reward and no glamour for the ego. He understood that these repetitive, simple tasks were expertly designed to strip away all vanity and self-importance, leaving behind only the naked, necessary awareness required to perform the duty flawlessly, realizing that the absence of external excitement forces the practitioner to locate the source of true fulfillment within the stillness of their own focused mind. Through sustained, non-judgmental immersion in the minute details of the polishing, the warm feeling of the cloth, the smell of the resin, the growing shine, Kenji experienced a profound shift, recognizing that the boredom had entirely dissolved, not because the task had changed, but because his relationship to it had been utterly revolutionized by the power of deep attention. He discovered a silent, spacious realm beneath the surface of the repetition, a place where the movement of his arm became a form of prayer, and the polished wood was a physical manifestation of his own newly ordered, clarified internal landscape, proving that the apparent emptiness of repetition was, in truth, an inexhaustible fullness. He realized with sudden clarity that the agitated resistance of boredom was merely a superficial emotional layer, and when he patiently penetrated that layer through relentless attention, he found a bedrock of profound stillness and quiet plenitude underneath, completely accessible even amidst the most monotonous chores. The wood, which initially felt hard and indifferent, now felt receptive and alive, echoing the transformation occurring within his own spirit, demonstrating that presence transforms the most mundane materials into objects worthy of deep, meditative reverence. Stepping back from the gleaming wooden floor, Kenji felt a quiet confidence bloom within him, knowing that the practice of sustained attention had survived the ultimate test of tedium, forging a robust, resilient stillness that could not be shaken by simple repetition, equipping him with an internal anchor sturdy enough to withstand the next great challenge. Carrying that hard-won stillness out of the protective walls of the temple and into the inevitable rush and overwhelming sensory input of the crowded, chaotic marketplace, enlightenment in the marketplace. Having successfully cultivated inner silence by transforming the monotony of polishing into a meditative rhythm, Kenji was next challenged to test the durability of his newly forged presence in the most unforgiving environment imaginable for a novice practitioner, the bustling, vibrant, and sensory overloaded marketplace located just beyond the edge of the quiet village. Master Hiko instructed Kenji to accompany him to town to procure necessary temple supplies, moving abruptly from the contained, silent, and visually harmonious world of the monastery, where every leaf and object seemed to hold its breath, into a whirlwind of sharp sounds, pungent aromas, relentless commercial activity, and the impatient, rushing energy of hundreds of hurried individuals focused solely on their transactions. The moment they stepped onto the main thoroughfare, Kenji felt an immediate, aggressive assault on his senses, threatening to dismantle the hard-earned tranquility he had established through weeks of silent practice, noting how his shoulders involuntarily tensed against the sudden loud clamor of voices shouting prices, the sharp metallic clang of tools being hammered, and the rapid, close movement of bodies maneuvering past him with determined haste. The air was thick with a confusing amalgam of scents, the sweet, cloying aroma of ripe, bruised fruit mixing violently with the sharp, salty tang of preserved fish, the earthy smell of fresh compost, and the pervasive, acrid exhaust fumes from a few passing motor vehicles, a chaotic symphony that immediately triggered the mind's tendency toward judgment and reactive withdrawal. Master Hiko, walking with the unhurried, measured pace of Kinhin, walking meditation, even amidst the pushing crowds, instructed Kenji to maintain the same intentionality and synchronization of breath and movement that he practiced in the empty temple courtyard, urging him to keep his center low and his gaze soft and wide, taking in the entire complex scene without fixating on any single element. The master reminded Kenji that the goal was not to filter or block the input, which is impossible in such an environment, but to hold the vast, overwhelming sensory data within the spacious container of his awareness without allowing the mind to become trapped in panic, aversion, or distraction by the sheer volume of stimuli. As they navigated the narrow, congested aisles between stalls piled high with goods, Kenji was instructed to consciously register the incredible saturation of color, the shocking, intense red of chilies stacked like pyramids, the deep, bruised purple of eggplants, the shimmering, wet green of freshly picked herbs, allowing the visual feast to simply pass through his optic nerves without generating grasping thoughts or desires, treating the entire scene as a temporary, vibrant art installation. He focused intently on the subtle shifts in surface texture, noting the rough burlap sacks, the smooth, cool surfaces of polished wooden counters, and the gritty unevenness of the cobblestone pathway beneath his well-worn sandals. The true practice of mindfulness in the market came alive during the essential social interactions, where Kenji had to maintain sharp attention while performing tasks that involved speech, complex calculation, and engagement with strangers whose minds were focused on profit and speed, a stark contrast to the quiet dedication of the temple community. He observed how the master performed the transactions, maintaining calm eye contact, speaking with an extremely precise, unhurried cadence, and counting the exchange of money with absolute, dedicated focus, treating the simple act of receiving change as a moment of profound spiritual importance, teaching Kenji that compassion begins with fully seeing and engaging the person standing directly in front of you. The master subtly pointed out that the chaotic hustle and bustle of the marketplace was the visible, dynamic expression of samsara, the endless, exhausting cycle of striving, wanting, acquisition, and loss, made physical by the strained expressions, the hurried movements, and the underlying anxiety visible in the eyes of many merchants concerned about the day's profit. Kenji realized that his task was to be an intentional island of unwavering calm within this sea of striving, demonstrating through his own peaceful presence that genuine contentment is possible even where the forces of attachment and desire are concentrated and most vigorously at play. During a brief moment of overwhelming noise, a sudden, high-pitched argument between two vendors punctuated by the loud crash of dropped ceramic pots, Kenji felt a sharp spike of anxiety and the familiar urge to run back to the temple's safety, but he immediately recalled the master's earlier instruction about impermanence and resistance. He used the sharp, external shock as a powerful, instantaneous alarm bell, yanking his awareness back to the solid ground of his own body, noting the precise physical sensation of the fear and allowing it to pass without response, confirming that the market's chaos was an even more potent teacher of non-reactivity than the temple's structured quietude. Upon concluding their transactions, the master offered a final powerful Zen instruction concerning the nature of the market experience. The path is found in the center of the world. If your awareness is lost in the noise of the market, it was never truly found in the silence of the meditation cushion. This teaching resonated deeply with Kenji, who now understood that the external location was irrelevant. The true boundary lay within his own commitment to presence, and that the robust, portable mindfulness forged in the furnace of daily life was superior to any fragile piece dependent on external, controlled conditions. Walking back towards the relative quiet of the temple grounds, his heavy bag filled with supplies, Kenji carried the vibrant energy of the marketplace with him, not as a residue of stress or distraction, but as a rich tapestry of sensory memories woven into the fabric of his quiet awareness, feeling more whole and integrated than ever before. He realized that the market had failed to steal his peace precisely because he had fully inhabited the present moment, proving that the temple was indeed portable, residing not in the wooden structure, but in the focused clarity and steady acceptance cultivated in the most mundane and even chaotic acts of the day. The reunion with the dishes. Returning to the temple after navigating the chaos of the marketplace, Kenji was led by Master Hiko back to the small, functional kitchen. The very place where his spiritual impatience had first manifested weeks ago, when confronted with the mountain of greasy ceramic bowls, plates, and rough wooden utensils. The master subtly gestured toward the soaking basin, once again filled with the aftermath of the evening meal, presenting Kenji with the precise task that had initially sparked his deep internal resistance and frustration. But this time, the familiar sight was received not with a groan of mental exhaustion or judgment, but with a profound, quiet sense of welcoming opportunity. He realized that the task of washing the dishes was not merely a chore, but a carefully curated mirror reflecting the exact quality and discipline of his internal state. And he approached the sink with the gentle reverence previously reserved only for the sacred altar. Kenji consciously immersed his hands into the warm, comforting water, noting the immediate soothing sensation of the heat enveloping his skin, transforming what was once a mere mechanical necessity into a luxurious, grounding sensory experience that centered his awareness immediately in the present moment, away from the mental residues of the busy market. He focused intently on the subtle, clean scent of the natural soap, a delicate fragrance of cedar and pine that blended perfectly with the residual steam rising from the basin, allowing these simple, tangible details to anchor his mind, understanding that the warmth of the water was symbolic of the compassion he was learning to cultivate for the tasks of his life. Picking up the first rough ceramic bowl, Kenji cradled it gently in his palm, feeling the slight weight and the cool, slick residue of the food on its surface, and he treated the act of scrubbing as an intentional ritual, applying pressure that was neither too forceful nor too timid, finding the perfect balance between effort and ease that the master often spoke of as the middle way. He methodically tracked the progress of the cloth over the surface, observing precisely when the dull layer of grease yielded to the clean, reflective sheen of the glaze, realizing that the external act of cleaning the bowl perfectly mirrored the internal practice of polishing away the accumulated layers of distraction and attachment within his own mind. He focused intently on the small resonant sound of the cutlery being rinsed beneath the flowing faucet, the clear bright clink of metal against metal that he allowed to simply rise and fall in the quiet air without labeling it as noise or distraction, using the auditory input as another thread in the tapestry of his focused presence, maintaining an unwavering single-pointed concentration that eliminated the space for restless, impatient thoughts to take root. Kenji understood deeply now that the only goal was the immaculate cleanliness of the vessel in his hands, not the future state of an empty sink or the time it would take to achieve it, thereby neutralizing the pressure of expectation that had poisoned his first attempt. There was a palpable sense of timelessness surrounding the sink, as Kenji moved through the large stack of remaining utensils with an almost hypnotic, unbroken rhythm, his movements economical, graceful, and deeply purposeful, embodying the very stillness he had previously sought only on the meditation cushion. The previous frantic speed and anxiety were entirely absent, replaced by a deep flowing integration of breath and motion, where the washing of the bowl became an act of profound dedication, transforming the humble sink into a sanctuary of sustained attention, where every drip of water and every brush of the sponge held immense, sacred value. The master Hiko stood in the doorway, observing Kenji's effortless focus and the quiet intensity radiating from his posture, noting the complete dedication evident in the careful way Kenji stacked the newly cleaned bowls to dry, ensuring they were perfectly balanced and aligned. demonstrating an internalized understanding that mindfulness demands meticulous attention to every single detail, no matter how small or seemingly inconsequential. The master observed that the external reality of the task, the dirty dishes, had not changed at all, but Kenji's internal environment, his attitude and acceptance, had been revolutionized, thereby changing the entire qualitative experience of the chore from suffering into quiet joy. As Kenji completed the final scrub of the last large wooden serving platter, wiping it down with a clean, dry towel until the wood grain shone richly, he felt a profound, gentle satisfaction that was entirely different from the hurried relief he had sought when rushing through the task before, recognizing that the joy came not from finishing the work, but from the complete, sustained inhabitation of the process itself. This was the quiet, non-seeking satisfaction of a task executed flawlessly, an experience of fulfillment that transcended the normal worldly dualities of success and failure, pleasure and pain, rooted firmly in the purity of intentional action. The simple, unadorned fact of the clean kitchen and the perfectly organized dry dishes became a powerful physical manifestation of the order and clarity he had established within his own consciousness, illustrating vividly the Zen principle that the state of the inner world is inevitably reflected in the state of the external environment and vice versa, creating a virtuous, self-reinforcing cycle of peace and dedication. Kenji experienced a moment of deep, intuitive understanding. The effort of cleaning was not separate from the effort of meditation, but was, in fact, the most potent and direct form of practice available to him, completely accessible in every single moment of his ordinary life. He realized that the dirt, the mess, and the complexity of the task had served as perfect, necessary anchors for his attention, forcing him away from the abstract realm of philosophical speculation and firmly into the demanding, immediate reality of the senses, transforming the kitchen into his most effective classroom for spiritual growth. The initial frustration stemmed from his rigid mental separation between spiritual practice and mundane labor, but now the two had seamlessly merged, revealing that the true path to liberation was not about fleeing the mundane, but about embracing and sanctifying it with conscious presence. Having transformed his perspective on this most foundational and repetitive task, Kenji had unlocked the key to the final, most profound teaching that Master Hiko was preparing to impart. The crucial wisdom regarding the ultimate futility of spiritual striving itself. The recognition that attention is not a tool to achieve enlightenment, but is the very fabric of enlightenment already fully realized, demanding only the gentle relinquishment of the demanding, future-oriented ego. He was now ready to absorb the crucial lesson that the profound peace he currently felt was not the result of a goal achieved, but the simple, unadorned state of non-striving, the wisdom of non-goal. Following the quiet, perfect completion of the dishwashing, Kenji stood before Master Hiko, feeling a quiet readiness, expecting the master to praise his improved technique, or perhaps to finally bestow some hidden, esoteric teaching that would complete his spiritual journey, seeking validation for the immense efforts and discipline he had painstakingly cultivated through the demanding practice of everyday mindfulness. The young monk was subtly clinging to the expectation of a final reward, a certification of his progress that would mark him as truly enlightened or advanced, a natural human tendency to seek confirmation that all the hard work had paid off in measurable, external spiritual currency, despite his progress in relinquishing other forms of worldly attachment. Master Hiko looked deeply into Kenji's clear, steady eyes and smiled, but offered no dramatic pronouncement or final secret, instead gently stating that the profound peace Kenji felt was not a result of doing the task well, but the result of relinquishing the deeply ingrained desire for the task to lead somewhere else. The fundamental wisdom that attention is not a means to an end, but is the eternal, complete end in itself. He explained that seeking spiritual attainment, no matter how noble it seems, is still a form of grasping, a subtle resistance to the perfection of the current moment, trapping the practitioner in a future state that never arrives because life is only ever happening right now, utterly negating the need for a final, transformative destination. The Master patiently elucidated that the true nature of nirvana, or liberation, is not a distant mountaintop to be climbed or a mystical state achieved after years of effort, but rather the simple, unadorned realization that the reality of the present moment, exactly as it is, the sound of the wind, the feel of the floor, the rhythm of breathing, is already entirely perfect, complete, and lacking nothing whatsoever. The suffering that Kenji initially felt while washing the dishes was a product of the mind clinging to a future moment of completion or a past moment of rest, implying that the now was somehow lacking or inadequate, proving that the constant search for more is the very definition of being spiritually lost. He shared a powerful, ancient Zen saying, "A man hurries, and the river hurries him. A man sits, and the river sits with him," explaining that the feeling of being hurried or rushed always stems from the internal friction of striving against the natural rhythm of existence, prioritizing a perceived future accomplishment over the lived quality of the present instant, turning life into a race toward an imaginary finish line. The absence of this internal striving, the commitment to total, non-judgmental presence in the moment, instantly dissolves the pressure of the clock and reveals the deep, intrinsic worth of the unhurried action, where time expands to accommodate the entirety of the attention given to it. The Master emphasized the concept of shikantaza, or just sitting, and now just doing, instructing Kenji to practice the activities of the day, walking, eating, cleaning, with the full, intentional commitment that the act itself is the only purpose, stripping away the complex, distracting layers of motivation, anticipation, or evaluation. To wash the dishes without the goal of clean dishes, but simply to wash. To sweep without the goal of a swept floor, but simply to sweep, transforms the utilitarian act into a pure expression of awareness, liberating the mind from the bondage of results and allowing profound stillness to flourish unhindered. Kenji began to understand that the restlessness of boredom he experienced on the veranda was simply the mind complaining that the practice was not getting anywhere, demanding a higher, more exciting trajectory toward an ultimate spiritual goal. But by embracing the work itself as the goal, the boredom vanished because there was no future expectation left to be denied. The liberation comes from this radical surrender of ambition, the realization that the profound peace found in the rhythm of the polishing cloth was not a temporary byproduct of the concentration, but was the inherent nature of his awareness when it ceased its restless striving. This realization fundamentally altered Kenji's internal relationship with effort. He continued to perform his tasks with diligence, precision, and dedication, recognizing the functional necessity and beauty of order, but the driving, underlying urgency was utterly absent, replaced by a deep flowing contentment that found rest in the midst of action. He saw clearly that external effectiveness and internal peace were not mutually exclusive, but were beautifully interwoven, realizing that the perfect alignment of the shoes and the gleaming quality of the wooden floor were natural, effortless outflows of a perfectly aligned and peaceful mind. Master Hiko concluded by summarizing the essential lesson of their practice together. The path is not a line leading to a point. The path is the circle of life, complete and perfect in every revolution. He pointed out that the bowls will always get dirty again, the floor will need sweeping again, and the practice is this endless, necessary cycle of engagement, acceptance, and renewal, meaning that true wisdom is found not in stopping the cycle, but in participating in it fully, finding the sacred not in the escape from the ordinary, but within the ordinary itself. Kenji felt a sense of immense lightness and liberation, realizing that the heavy burden of seeking enlightenment, a concept he had carried with him since entering the temple, had finally evaporated, leaving behind only the simple, joyful commitment to the present moment, free from the tyrannical demands of the future self. He now possessed an internal stillness that was entirely self-sufficient and portable, deeply rooted in the mundane reality of washing, sweeping, and walking, prepared to meet whatever tasks the rest of his life might hold with unwavering, non-striving presence. With this final, gentle instruction settling into the core of his being, Kenji was internally anchored, recognizing that the temple, the master, and the path were not external entities to be followed or learned, but were permanently housed within his own attentive awareness, ready to accompany him as he prepared to transition into the next phase of his contemplative journey, carrying the quiet certainty of inner peace wherever his sandals might lead him. The port of inner peace. With the final lesson on non-striving settled deeply within his heart, Kenji experienced a profound internal shift, recognizing that the sanctuary he had so diligently sought within the walls of the temple was not a physical location at all, but a quality of awareness entirely transportable, rooted permanently in the simple dedication to the present moment, wherever he might find himself standing. He understood that the peace he now carried was not dependent on the quiet silence of the meditation hall or the absence of worldly chaos, but was securely anchored in the precise rhythm of his breath and the compassionate attention he brought to the most mundane details, rendering him entirely self-sufficient in maintaining his internal equilibrium, no matter the external circumstances that might unfold around him in the future. This was the quiet, undeniable realization that he could carry the entire practice, the essence of the Master's teachings, and the profound stillness of the Zen garden with him, securely tucked into the simple act of breathing, making every step he took a conscious, sacred journey. Master Hiko, observing Kenji's settled, radiant posture, confirmed this final understanding by reminding the young monk that the mind itself is the ultimate temple, perpetually available and ready for sanctuary, provided only that one chooses to dwell there with unwavering presence and gentle self-acceptance, free from the endless constructions of regret about the past or anxiety regarding the future. The Master explained that the rigorous training in washing the dishes and sweeping the paths served not to sanctify the exterior environment, but to forge an internal discipline so robust and flexible that it could withstand the inevitable winds of attachment and aversion found in the broader world, ensuring that the inner sanctuary remained inviolable, a constant, stable harbor accessible immediately beneath the surface turbulence of daily life. The breath, which Kenji had previously used mainly as an introductory anchor for formal sitting, now became the ubiquitous, ever-present thread woven seamlessly through the complex fabric of his existence, serving as an instant portal back to stillness, whether he was engaged in conversation, chopping vegetables, or navigating a crowded path. He learned to feel the subtle, gentle expansion of his abdomen with every inhale and the soft, complete release with every exhale, using this simple biological rhythm not as a forced exercise, but as a tender, compassionate reminder that he was always held by the life force itself, allowing the inhalation to be a receiving and the exhalation to be a letting go of all unnecessary striving and tension. The practice of walking meditation, or kinhin, which Kenji had initially found somewhat awkward and artificial, now extended naturally into every journey he made, transforming the necessary movement between places into an extension of his formal practice, ensuring that the space between activities was no longer rushed or wasted, but consciously inhabited. He practiced feeling the contact of his sandals with the earth, the subtle shifting of his weight, and the deliberate placing of each foot, moving through the temple grounds with a quiet, flowing dignity that was neither slow nor fast, but perfectly synchronized with the deep, unwavering stillness he carried within, making the path itself the destination he perpetually sought. The hard-won boundary between meditation time and lifetime gradually dissolved completely for Kenji, leaving behind only the simple reality of awareness applied moment by moment, realizing that the depth of presence achieved while sitting on the cushion was meaningless unless it could be maintained while preparing food or mending robes. He discovered that the quality of his consciousness remained uniform throughout the day, recognizing the same quiet essence in the focused stillness required to thread a needle as in the profound silence achieved during the deepest phase of his morning zazen, illustrating that true liberation is not a specialized state, but an integrated way of being that permeates all activity. Even the sounds of the outside world, which the temple often sought to minimize, the distant barking of dogs, the muffled voices of villagers, the sharp call of a crow high in the cedar trees, were no longer treated as disruptive intruders, but were welcomed as pure, neutral information, gentle auditory reminders of the fleeting, impermanent nature of all things, including the thoughts themselves. Kenji practiced letting the sounds arrive fully and depart immediately without grasping onto them or judging them as pleasant or annoying, using the constant flux of the sensory environment to deepen his commitment to non-reactivity, allowing the world to exist exactly as it is without internal commentary. He began to find a deep, quiet joy in the inescapable repetition of monastic life, the daily sweeping, the constant cleaning, the ritual preparation of food, understanding that repetition was not a hindrance to spiritual progress, but its fundamental cornerstone, providing infinite opportunities to practice sustained, intentional presence. The repetition stripped away the illusion of novelty, forcing the mind to settle into the underlying stillness of the process itself, revealing that the true fulfillment lay not in the excitement of new experiences, but in the profound, accessible depth found within the gentle monotony of the completely familiar. Kenji cultivated a deep, quiet sense of gratitude for all the seemingly small and insignificant elements that supported his practice: the rough wooden handle of the broom, the resilient fiber of his robes, the simple warmth of the morning rice bowl, and even the necessary friction of the demanding tasks that had tested his impatience. He recognized that every object and every moment was a vital teacher, a perfect tool placed precisely on his path to guide him toward awareness. Understanding that true reverence is expressed not through grand gestures, but through the respectful, gentle handling of all things, recognizing the inherent worth of even the most common utensil. The intense burning desire for enlightenment, that abstract, demanding goal that had fueled his initial fervor and impatience, finally cooled and subsided entirely, replaced by a profound, restful acceptance of what is, right here, right now, as complete and sufficient, removing the enormous weight of expectation he had placed upon his spiritual progress. Kenji understood that the goal was never external to the present moment, but was, in fact, the sustained, non-striving presence itself, rendering the path and the destination indistinguishable and allowing him to settle deeply into the quiet, perfect simplicity of just being. With the internalization of these liberating teachings, Kenji felt a quiet readiness, no longer needing the protective structure of the temple walls to maintain his equilibrium, prepared to return to the world of constant flux and demand, armed with the profound certainty that his true haven of peace was permanently anchored within his own dedicated attention. He knew that the practice would continue, not despite the difficulties of the mundane world, but precisely through them, transforming every interaction, every duty, and every challenge into another opportunity to sweep clean the temple of the heart. And so, we bring our own gentle journey to a quiet pause, allowing the profound stillness Kenji found in the simplest acts, the washing of the bowl, the sweeping of the path, the cutting of the vegetables, to settle fully within our own receptive minds, knowing that the peace we cultivate is entirely portable, ready to be carried back into the tapestry of our own lives. We have walked alongside Kenji, feeling the subtle resistance of the mind against the mundane, and witnessing the liberation that comes from completely surrendering to the necessary tasks of life, transforming the ordinary into the sacred simply by infusing it with non-judgmental awareness and a deep commitment to the present moment, recognizing that the only necessary work is the cultivation of a calm heart. If this shared sanctuary of narrative contemplation offers you a harbor from the world's clamor, please consider subscribing to maintain this port of peace, allowing these quiet teachings to continue reaching those who seek deep relaxation and mindful rest in the necessary turbulence of their busy lives. Now, as we prepare to fully transition from the narrated tale into the deep embrace of healing rest, we invite you to consciously loosen any lingering tension that you might still be unknowingly holding in your physical form. Imagining the gentle, warm water that Kenji used to wash the dishes now flowing over your scalp and shoulders, soothing every muscle and dissolving any remaining knots of worry. Allow your breath to become even deeper, softer, and more natural, feeling the immense weight and security of the mattress beneath you, accepting the profound permission to fully let go of the day's activities and the subtle demands of the striving mind, knowing that everything is perfectly taken care of in this quiet moment of surrender. Gently relax the delicate muscles around your eyes, allowing the eyelids to become profoundly heavy, smooth, and entirely unmoving, releasing the subtle strain of visual focus that we carry throughout the demanding hours of wakefulness, and let this deepening relaxation migrate softly down into your jaw, softening the hinge and allowing the tongue to rest loosely against the floor of your mouth, ensuring that any residual mental chatter or resistance simply drifts away like a single quiet leaf, floating downstream on a gentle, dark current. Let the entire weight of your body sink effortlessly deeper and deeper into the supporting surface, completely protected, completely still, ready to receive the immense, restorative power of absolute sleep. We leave Kenji settled in his quiet understanding, knowing that his temple is wherever he is, anchored in the simplicity of his breath and the acceptance of the moment. And we carry this truth into our own transition towards deep, peaceful slumber, trusting that the wisdom absorbed tonight will continue to sustain us as we drift into the deep, healing waters of the subconscious mind. May your night be filled with profound rest, and may the quiet certainty of your inner peace remain with you, accompanying your dreams until the gentle arrival of the morning light, leaving you entirely refreshed and ready to greet the ordinary beauty of the day. Sleep deeply now.